today we have a really special guest. I've been very excited for this episode, and it's my community psychology professor, Dr. Seanna Leath. Thank you so much for coming.
Of course.
I'm going to read a little biography that I wrote about her because she's such a special person. Dr. Leath attained her PhD in education and psychology from Michigan, Ann Arbor, and her BA in psychology and Africana studies in Pomona College. Quoting from her WashU Psych and Brain Sciences biography, Dr. Leath's breadth of knowledge spans the interconnected effects of academic ability, social connectedness, and psychological well-being of Black women and girls' educational trajectories, Black women and girls' beliefs about freedom and radical healing, and how Black parents integrate their social political awareness into their parenting practices to develop healthy relationships with their children. You snapped writing that.
But when you hear it out loud, it's like, oh my God, that's a lot of words. That's a lot of like jargony, 25-cent unnecessary words. But yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for inviting me.
The reason I wanted you here today was to talk more about the idea of community psychology, how the class itself came to be, whether did you help come up with it? Was it already something that happened? How did that go about?
Ooh, I don't even know where to start with that. The WashU Psych department in particular, I mentioned this in class a couple of times too. They're really heavy into like cognition and neurological development. They're really heavy into bench science, thinking about experimental methods. And so bringing it to the campus, yes, I would say they pulled me from a psychology department where there was a community area. So some institutions have actual PhD programs where folks get their PhD in community psych and learn prevention and intervention methods. So did I come up with community psych? For sure, not at all, as you all got from the first couple of classes. But in terms of what I'm doing in our psych department and thinking about how universities can really be different in what they value and the expertise they value, I'm offering something unique for sure, at least currently. For some students, they've been in very elite, white, wealthy neighborhoods, schools, organizations all their lives. And that's a very different perspective from some of the students in the class who come from maybe lower income backgrounds. They are racialized in different ways. They have volunteered, been involved in schools. And so it's been challenging and fun to think about what can be applicable and useful for students across the board. The other class I teach, at least now, is Psych of Black Women, and that one we just go ham and go hard about Black women basically all semester. But this has been a much more like broader theory, and that's my class. That's the one where from the outset I'm like, we're talking about Black women literally all semester. So if that's not what you want to do in the class for you. And I can say that, but this was a very different field where it's kind of like, how can I make it relevant for students from these different backgrounds? So when we think about community psych, we're thinking about human experience, but within their social context, basically. So again, thinking about basic psych or more experimental psych, we want to bring people in and we want to try to control all the variables that are happening so we can say that X definitely has an effect on Y, and we controlled for all these extraneous variables. Community psych, instead, it's more of like being in the world or being in a particular social setting. And it's also very health focused and hopefully social justice focused. I would say one of the things, again, that I get a lot from students, psych and non-psych majors, where they're like, psychology feels like it's not relevant to me unless I'm thinking about it in like clinical terms or I'm going to see clients. And psychology is so much more than that. And so community psych is really supposed to be at this interface of thinking about how do we improve social conditions, the world that we live in community with the folks who are in those spaces who bring a wealth of different types of knowledge, experiences, and concerns or needs to the table.
Let's take it back to you as a person.
Okay.
How have you actively engaged with your community throughout your life?
It's so, one of the things that I don't know if it's going well or not in the class, actually, you can tell me I'm evals, anywho, is this notion of like, when we talk about community, sometimes we say it as though it's this like amorphous or separate thing. So you're saying like, how have I engaged with communities throughout my life? Always. One thing is that like, we're just in it. We're like literally a person in the world living our lives, and we are in different spaces. So it's and we can name them. So I can say like, how have I engaged with the Black community? But that in many ways feels weird. Like I am in that part of it. But there is something about like when I'm in my professor role and I'm doing a workshop or I'm teaching, maybe a workshop for parents or something, versus like I am the parent going to the back to school night with my kids, but I still have all my thoughts in my head. But I'm the mom in that situation. I
was going to ask what kind of activated you to be in this role, but it's kind of just like again, the answer might also be just like living here,
No, because folks, they go in different areas, right, within psych, and then like within the world. I could have been doing something completely different. So that makes sense to me, even though you say you didn't want to talk about trauma. So I'm like, I don't know how we're going to know.
No, you know what? As long as we're like laughing in between.
Okay. So there's something. So I'm first gen. I'm from Little Rock, Arkansas, so I'm from the South. And when I think about being a first gen student, education was basically my way out. And it's also like in school, even though there was a lot of, I would say, discrimination and bias happening that's common for Black girls, that's also where I got a lot of my positive feedback. Like, you're such a good student, you're earning A's, she's smart, she's this. And I also knew that like college was supposed to be part of my future. That was what was going to happen, even though we didn't have no plans for how I was going to pay for it. We didn't actually know the application process. Like that is my story. You'll hear me tell that in different spaces because it's such a core part of me getting here. So I applied for all these colleges, honestly, last minute. There was no early decision. There were no college visits. Like, that was not a part of kind of like the social capital that my school had. But I ended up at Pomona College, which was a liberal arts school in California.
Such a good school.
Such a good school. And listen, that's one of those things where like, you don't even not know what you don't know until you're in it. So that might have been one of those things where if I really understood like, 9% of students or 13% of students, I'm like, I'm not going to be one of those 9 or 13, right? Like, I flew out to visit, got off the plane, and I didn't realize they were going to take all my like shampoo and conditioner and dump it at the airport. And I was like, I need to go to Walmart. I have no shampoo. And the admissions lady was like, okay, right, because she probably like, who was this like 18-year-old coming off the plane, and she's like, I don't have anything to clean my body with. But anyway, so get there, definitely culture shock with the whiteness. I was a psych and Africana studies double major. We had more like psych classes that I would say were kind of more community based in that department at the time, which was really cool. But I really fell in love with like Africana studies. So I basically like took all the courses, and I knew that actually about third year in, long story, probably need to make it short, was when I realized that you could like do a career that involved like being in community and like studying achievement. That's what I started with, was like achievement. I was like, why are Black students not motivated? Had a very deficit based lens, right? It's this, because we have these narratives in life, social narratives that get ingrained, thinking about like, what was she wearing if she's assaulted? Why aren't Black students achieving like white students? Like they must have been on drugs or not working hard if they're homeless or they're unhoused. So I had kind of that like achievement, deficit based achievement narrative in undergrad. Went to grad school saying I wanted to study Black students' motivation. Got to grad school, so much reading. Anybody want to go to grad school? Like, be prepared to read more than you ever have in your life. But that's when I was introduced to Black feminist theory, and I really started thinking about like, what kind of impact do I want to have? And I wanted to be a faculty member who does translational work. Again, like run a girls program. I don't want to just talk about theory, and I don't want to, academia can be really insular. And I think the other thing, it can be really elitist. And there's also this notion of like, we forget how to talk to people and just like what makes sense. Or like, we get really concerned about like nitty gritty differences in theories and not like literally social issues and social problems. So I think that coming from where I'm coming from, being first gen, being lower income, being Black, being a Black woman, having lots of different type of, just different experiences of trauma when you're growing up in certain settings, I wouldn't have stayed if it hadn't felt like my work was relevant.
There was this video that you showed in class, and it was by Thema Bryant. Okay.
I kept saying her name wrong. Terrible. Yeah.
The title of the TED Talk was "Why We Need to Decolonize Psychology." Tell me about your perspective about that. Just like what decolonizing psychology means. I know we talked about it a bit in class, but that video, I was like at the verge of tears near the end. I was like, please turn it off.
It went off,
I was like in the middle of the class. I was like looking around, and everyone was just like watching it.
Deadpan. Like, didn't do the reading today. Half paying attention. Glad we're watching the video. So a couple of things. I showed that video because, again, she's like the 2023 president for the American Psychological Association. So, again, thinking about who's in power in these organizations is really important. And, again, y'all coming from different backgrounds, like, I don't know if that knowledge is being spread to folks. I'm like, let me just show this. One, in terms of decolonizing psychology, it has its roots in indigenous ways of knowing, indigenous practices. So I want to say that's actually something that I'm actively learning more about myself, and also doing it in a way that's not appropriation. But that's what I mentioned that I was at that lunch, and the director of the American Indian Center here at WashU, she said, what is it to really think about the fact that at one point we were 100% of this population, and now we represent 1% of the United States population, right? United States. And so she said that, and I'm like, man,
that kind of just gave me chills when you just said that.
Yes, it did when I was sitting at the lunch table. Right. Same thing. And so decolonizing psych is thinking about the ways that psychology and other sciences and other fields in general have been co-opted and controlled with very Eurocentric, white supremacist ways of thinking and doing, even thinking about experimental methods where you bring folks in and you're testing things out on them. And so decolonizing is really rethinking, how do we write? How do we think? What do we value? And she was talking about it in a clinical sense because she is a clinician, where maybe it's not a one-on-one group, like a therapy model where you come in, you tell me all your problems, I diagnose you with something that's wrong with you. But again, it's important in the community psych context because it's like, maybe we think about folks as individuals, but who they're connected to. Maybe we're more interested in listening than thinking that something has to be diagnosed. And we can think about how it could be connected to like our large use of pharmaceuticals within the country. Thinking about, there are a lot of interconnections. So when we decolonize psych, I think fundamentally it's about reconsidering how we think about people and pathology, even to the point of thinking about mental health versus focusing on mental illness. But I'm in that journey too. And I think another example of it is, if we think about it in higher ed too, there are a lot of like paywalls. So it's based on hierarchies. And you gain more knowledge, and a lot of times the hierarchies are based on like social class and education and whether you deserve to be in the room. It's based on power. And so another part of decolonizing is thinking of like somewhat is leveling the playing field, but realizing again that we are all valuable to the human experience, and then finding that value in people and thinking about how we can then move towards wellness for everyone, knowing that we all have different needs and desires and goals in life.
And I bet a lot of people probably think of decolonizing psychology is only beneficial to Black, Indigenous, people of color, when it's like, I think back to like conversations I have about patriarchy, about how patriarchy bites men in the ass equally as much as it bites women in the ass. Sorry, I guess that was weird terminology, but
okay, I get you continuing with the metaphor. I got it. Yeah.
In that same token, if we are reevaluating how to talk about people and how to engage with them, it also has to benefit white people as much as it would benefit anyone else. I would assume.
Yes, and I think we see this example playing out over and over. I'm thinking about Jonathan Metzger's book. He's a medical physician, and he wrote something talking about whiteness and healthcare and how it's having terrible healthcare systems also shortened white people's lives, poor white people's lives in particular, who are living in rural areas. But again, hanging on to that racial privilege means that I would rather be white and wrong and everybody have good healthcare versus having to give that up. And I'm also thinking about the new Jim Crow. So Michelle Alexander, right? She's writing about law. She's writing about the prison industrial complex. And she says also white people are incarcerated. White people experience police brutality, not nearly at the rates that Black, Indigenous, Latinx folks do. But still, revamping these systems will improve society overall. And so then you get to like, if we have all the stats and we have the logic and we know that this is the case, why don't we just do these things? And so that's when I think we can really get into like how deeply entrenched bias is and how much if we're living in capitalistic society, again, a society based on hierarchies, we value this notion, some folks more than others, and those folks who are in power, that we can be at the top. And so going to patriarchy, men, male-bodied folks, where they're like, oh, I have something that I'm going to lose, even if the gains would be worth it. So we see that kind of logic in a lot of different systems and identities.
It's really, like you said, it's really all about power and like people not wanting to let go of that power, because even if they don't like saliently see it as such,